Good day everyone. We're now on the third part ng lessons natin on enzymes. So we're still on the topic of microbial metabolism. At the end of this session, you should be able to determine the effect of temperature, pH, substrate concentration, and enzyme inhibitors on enzymatic activity. In terms of what we have discussed so far, so dun sa first part of our lesson on enzymes, we've discussed about the characteristics of enzymes. Sa second part naman ng lesson on enzymes, napag-usapan natin yung mechanism of enzymatic action and yung naming and grouping of enzymes. Now, for the third part, which is our lesson for today, we will be discussing the factors influencing enzymatic activity. Specifically, we will be discussing about the effect of temperature, pH, substrate concentration, and effect of enzyme inhibitors. So let's begin with the effect of temperature. So first, increasing the temperature actually increases the enzyme activity until the enzyme is denatured and inactivated. Well, in general, increasing yung temperature actually increases yung rate ng isang chemical reaction. Well, this is because yung molecules na at low temperatures relatively they move more slowly than high temperatures. As you increase the temperature, yung movement ng molecules becomes faster. So sa context ng enzymatic activity, this means that as you increase the temperature, leading to an increase in terms of yung movement, which leads to faster movement ng molecules, yung substrate and yung enzymes active site, dahil mabilis yung movement, will also have more chances of interacting. So yun yung essentially principle. As you increase the temperature, nag-move faster yung molecules, yung specifically yung enzyme niyo, yung active site niya, and yung substrate, so nag-move sila more frequently. So mas ini-expect natin na mas magi-increase yung frequency ng interaction nila sa isa't isa. So that's why as you increase the temperature, you increase enzymatic activity. However, yung pag-increase ng temperature at ng enzymatic activity together with it, meron lang siyang certain ceiling. So at a certain temperature, meron hanggang doon lang yung pag-increase ng enzymatic activity in relation to increasing the temperature. Beyond that temperature, what happens is yung enzymatic activity drops sharply. So kung makikita ninyo in terms of slope, mas steep itong decline ng enzymatic activity beyond yung temperature, yung ceiling temperature. So, anong nangyayari? Bakit nagkakaroon ng drop beyond a certain temperature in terms of enzymatic activity? So, what happens is, if you could remember, yung enzymes natin ay proteins. Usually proteins. So, meaning, sensitive sila to temperature. At high temperature, ang nangyayari is nadi-disrupt yung mga bonds ng protein. So yung hydrogen bonds, yung ionic bonds, or ibang weak interactions na nagsastabilize ng shape ng protein. And sabi natin, yung enzyme, very dependent siya dun sa stability ng shape niya. Dahil doon nag-fit yung substrate. Once masira yung three-dimensional shape na yon, nagiging inactive din yung enzyme. So, nadi-denature yung protein. So, ito yung nangyayari. As you increase the temperature, it reaches a point where the proteins are denatured. So, which leads to a drop ng enzymatic activity. So it is important to take note, no? So in general, so you have an increasing temperature, no, and enzymatic activity, so together. And they reach a certain temperature, and beyond that temperature, na-denature na yung protein, so there will be a sharp decline, no, ng enzymatic activity. So ang tawag dito sa part na to, no, this is actually your optimal temperature. So ang bawat enzyme, meron silang optimal temperature. Ano yung optimal temperature? Yung optimal temperature is a temperature wherein yung enzymatic activity is at its greatest. No? Or, pwede rin natin isipin, this is where yung reaction rate, no, is at its greatest. No, bakit? So, dito, sa part na to, yan yung part wherein hindi pa nadidenature yung enzyme. And, eto, at the same time, so hindi pa siya denatured, but at the same time, dito siya nakaka-experience ng greatest number ng molecular collision between the enzyme's active site and the substrate. So, maximum yung collision. So, which leads to faster conversion ng reactants to products. So, dito nangyayari yun. So, balanced, na-attain na yung maximum number of collision which enables it to convert, no, yung substrate to products faster, no, pero hindi pa siya nadidenature. So normally, no, when we talk about yung human enzymes, yung range ng optimal temperature niyan ay nasa 35 to 40. Same goes with yung disease-producing bacteria sa human body. So they also have, no, yung temperature range na yon as their optimal temperature, so 35 to 40. However, no, it is important to take note na hindi limited dun sa temperature na yun yung optimal temperature. There are other organisms, no, such as yung thermophilic or heat-loving bacteria natin that has an optimal temperature that is beyond 70 degrees. No, so, basically, yung point lang is, bawat enzyme, meron silang kanya-kanyang optimal temperature. Although, most of the enzymes na disease na related sa human body ay nasa around 35 to 40. So now, let's go to pH. Na pH, katulad ng temperature, meron ding optimal pH. No? So, ito yung optimal pH. No? Again, this is a pH kung saan yung enzyme natin is in its most active state. So, maximum enzymatic activity sa optimal pH. No, dito specifically sa figure na to, yung optimal pH ay nasa 5. No? However, no, most enzymes actually fall dito sa range ng 6 to 8, no, in terms of their optimal pH. So, i-move lang natin yan para mapakita yung 6 to 8. So, you can imagine it as, ayan, parang meron kang curve na nasa taas, pinakataas, no, yung pinakataas na enzymatic activity ay nasa 6 to 8. Ayan. So, what happens, no, beyond or below that optimal pH? So, kung makikita natin, no, as you go farther, habang lumalayo ka dun sa optimal pH, nagde-decline din yung enzymatic activity. Yan. So, bakit? No? Kasi sabi natin, katulad ng temperature, yung extreme changes sa pH, pwede rin siyang mag-cause ng denaturation. No, specifically kasi class, yung H plus and OH minus, which varies, no, in concentration depending on the pH, they can compete, no, with yung hydrogen and ionic bonds ng enzyme. So which results, no, into denaturation. And again, no, once na ma-change na yung ma-denature yung protein, ma-change na yung 3D structure niya, which is very crucial, no, dun sa pag-function ng protein or ng enzyme natin specifically. Yan. So, we have discussed temperature so far and then pH. Now, let's discuss the effect of substrate concentration. So, in terms of yung general, no, na behavior, habang logically speaking, habang ini-increase mo yung substrate, nag-i-increase din yung enzymatic activity up until a saturation point. No? Ano yung saturation point? Well, normally, kapag sobrang taas na ng substrate concentration, yung enzyme natin is said to be in saturation. Meaning, pag yung enzyme is in saturation, yung active site niya ay laging occupied, no, by the substrate or yung product. No? And yung catalyzing activity niya ay nasa maximum na. So, ibig sabihin, hindi na siya na babakante. So, laging merong product doon or reactant or substrate. So, given na yung enzymatic activity is already at its maximum rate, dahil nga parang nililimit na, nakadepende na siya doon sa enzyme mismo, kahit dagdagan mo pa yung substrate concentration, dahil puno na yung dahil puno na yung laging puno yung active site ng enzyme, kahit dagdagan mo pa yung substrate concentration nun, hindi na magi-increase further yung enzyme activity. So in a way, yung enzyme mo, parang siya na yung naging limiting reactant, no, or limiting factor doon sa reaction. So in that case, makikita natin na magi-increase yung enzymatic activity, but no, once it reaches yung saturation point ng enzyme, wala nang magiging effect yung pag-increase pa ng substrate concentration. So although under normal conditions naman, yung enzymes ay hindi sila saturated with substrate. So meaning, no, in general, no, at normal conditions, as you increase the substrate concentration, nag-increase din yung enzymatic activity. Okay, so lastly, let's discuss the effect of enzyme inhibitors. Yan. So enzyme inhibitors in general, no, they reduce yung enzyme function. No, and in terms of the type of inhibition or the type of inhibitor, we have two. No, we have competitive inhibitors and we have non-competitive inhibitors. So what's the difference? Yung competitive inhibitors, they attack the active site, no, of your enzyme. So meaning, nagko-compete sila with the substrate doon sa active site. So kaya tinawag na competitive. So nagko-compete yung competitive inhibitor and yung substrate doon sa active site. So ano nagiging effect niya? Dahil nagko-compete yung competitive inhibitor doon sa normal substrate, nare-reduce ngayon yung productivity ng enzyme. Kasi nabablock yung substrate from entering the active site. So normally, in terms of yung character ng isang competitive inhibitor, normally it is similar in shape and chemical structure, no, dun sa normal substrate. So halos similar sila ng itsura and shape and composition. Now, ang difference lang nila is that unlike yung substrate, kasi yung substrate, di ba, it forms products pagka nagdumikit siya sa active site. Yung competitive inhibitors, hindi sila nagpo-form ng products. So, nagbablock lang talaga sila dun sa active site. So, yung competitive inhibitors, pwede silang mag-bind irreversibly. So, ibig sabihin, nandun na sila forever. At pine-prevent na nila yung pag-interact ng substrate and ng active site. Or pwede ring reversible. So, meaning, yung competitive inhibitor, alternately, no, ino-occupy niya yung active site at umaalis din siya. So, kung ganito yung effect naman, pinapabagal niya yung interaction ng enzyme with substrate kasi siya yung pumapasok. Tapos pwede lang pumasok yung substrate once, no, nakaalis na yung competitive inhibitor. So para ma-overcome yun, normally yung reversible na competitive yung reversible na effect ng competitive inhibitor, tinataasan natin yung substrate concentration. So syempre, mas mataas yung substrate concentration, tas mas konti yung competitive inhibitor, mas mataas yung chance na mag-interact yung substrate with the active site of the enzyme. So, ang example ng competitive inhibitor ay itong sulfanilamide. No, this is actually a chemical, no, that is being used, no, to sa mga antibacterial drugs. No, so itong sulfanilamide, itong group na to, it actually inhibits, no, yung para-aminobenzoic acid or PABA. Ini-inhibit niya yung enzyme na ang substrate ay PABA. So, saan ba ginagamit yung PABA ng bacteria? Normally, yung PABA ay ginagamit ng bacteria to produce folic acid. No? And, of course, no, folic acid is a vitamin. Saan ginagamit yung vitamins? Normally, ginagamit siya as coenzyme, no, which is relevant dun sa enzymatic function ng mga enzymes ng bacteria. So, without folic acid, posibleng may mga enzymes na hindi mag-function properly dahil wala silang coenzyme. So, specifically, ganito yung nangyayari. No, normally, yung PABA, no, it interacts so, yung process niyan is yung formation ng folic acid. So, yung sulfanilamide, which is part, no, component siya ng mga drugs na tinatawag nating sulfonamides, siya, instead na PABA yung magre-react, sulfanilamide yung nagre-react doon sa enzyme. So, in effect, hindi magpo-proceed yung reaction. So, itong antibacterial drug na to, yun yung nagiging, mechanism. No, and of course, pag hindi na-synthesize yung folic acid, hindi mag-grow yung bacteria. Kasi kailangan yung coenzyme na yun for the normal functioning of your enzyme. Yung human cells, hindi tayo gumagamit ng PABA para gumawa ng folic acid. So, kaya, hindi yung sulfanilamide, hindi niya napapatay yung human cells kasi hindi tayo gumagamit ng PABA. Ang napapatay niya ay bacteria kasi sila yung gumagamit ng PABA to make folic acid. And next, no, we have non-competitive inhibitors. Yung non-competitive inhibitors naman, no, hindi nila ina-attack yung active site. Ang ina-attack nila is yung allosteric site. No, what is an allosteric site? Well, essentially, yung allosteric site, it's a part of the enzyme other than the active site. So, it can be, basically yun yung definition niya. It's a site dun sa enzyme other than yung active site. So, ina-attack niya yung site, yung allosteric site, instead na yung active site. So, anong effect niya? In general, no, ginagawa niya, pag nag-react sa allosteric site, masisira yung shape ng enzyme, hindi na magkaka-interact yung substrate and yung active site. So, yung effect, katulad din ng competitive inhibitor, pwedeng reversible or irreversible. Depende kung kaya pang makabalik ng enzyme sa original shape niya. No, once ma-remove yung non-competitive inhibitor. An example of a non-competitive inhibitor is cyanide. Now, in fact, yung cyanide, tinatawag siyang enzyme poison because it can permanently inactivate enzymes. So, specifically, no, yung cyanide is an enzyme poison na nagpe-prevent ng ATP production, no, leading to eventual death ng cell. Kasi syempre, kung walang energy yung cell, hindi magpa-function properly yung cell. So, pine-prevent na yung formation ng ATP. No, how? No, it actually, yung cyanide actually binds dun sa allosteric site ng cytochrome oxidase or yung tinatawag nating complex 4. No, which is responsible for passing the electrons to oxygen, which is yung final electron acceptor, no, dun sa electron transport chain, and will eventually lead to the formation of ATP. So, since na-prevent niya na yon, hindi na magtutuloy-tuloy yung electron transport chain. In effect, hindi na magpo-produce ng ATP. Yun. So, basically, no, yun yung summary. Ito na yung summary nung na-discuss natin so far. So, first, we've discussed about the effect of temperature. So, in terms of yung behavior niya, sabi natin, increasing the temperature increases enzymatic activity until yung optimal temperature, and beyond the optimal temperature, nagkakaroon ka ng sharp drop, no, dun sa enzymatic activity because of enzyme denaturation or protein denaturation. Then we also discuss about pH. So sa optimal pH, no, as you go far or away from the optimal pH, nagpa-decline, no, yung enzymatic activity because a change in pH can also lead to protein denaturation. So in terms naman of substrate concentration, so normally nag-i-increase, no, as yung enzymatic activity as you increase the substrate concentration until it reaches a saturation point wherein wala nang magiging effect, no, yung pag-increase ng substrate concentration sa enzymatic activity dahil fully occupied na yung active site ng enzyme. Lastly, we've discussed inhibitors. No, we've discussed competitive and non-competitive inhibitors which reduce yung enzyme function. So here are references for our lesson today. Here are the photo credits. With that, thank you very much, and see you on our next lesson.